Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for all of those joining us and all of those who will be listening afterwards. Actually, I would like to warmly welcome all our panelists who will be part of this FIP digital event today. And as the vision of FIP, the world is a place where everyone should benefit from access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable medications, as well as health technologies. Our mission is to support global health, enabling the advancement of pharmacy practice, pharmaceutical science, and education. And in this context, we are really pleased today to be delivering this event, episode number 23, about remote laboratory delivery. Start now sharing the slides for our webinar. So here we go. So welcome to episode number 23, in which we are going to address remote laboratory courses across pharmacy schools during COVID-19. Are you ready for this change? I'm happy to announce that this webinar is in collaboration with the FIP Academic Institutional Membership and the Academic Pharmacy section, who were greatly helpful in the planning of this webinar. My name is Dalal Hamoudi. I am the chairperson at the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences at the School of Pharmacy and a member of the FIP and the American Society for Microbiology. This is the special online program for FIP on COVID-19 in order to respond to the pandemic together. So this event lies within the scope of such response to remote learning during the time of lockdown or during the current pandemic. The COVID-19 Information Hub is available on the shown link, which appears on this slide. By the way, this webinar is being live broadcasted on Facebook and will be available later on the FIP resources. So you can refer to these resources for information from this webinar and other similar webinars. The International Pharmaceutical Federation is the global federation which includes the largest number of pharmacists and pharmacy associations worldwide. We are proud today to have all our participants going on live in this webinar in order to share the FIP vision. We would like to take special thanks here for the Academic Pharmacy Section leadership for their assistance and their support for delivering these online events. We would like also to thank the academic institution membership and the global academic pharmacy leaders also for continuous support on such type of events which are addressed towards academia. Here we have the Academic Institutional Membership Advisory Committee, for whom I thank everyone also for their continuous re-evaluation and support. As I said, this recording will be later freely available on the FIP website and is now being recorded live stream on Facebook. And your feedback is very welcome at webinars@fip.org. During this webinar, we will have options for Q&A, and you will be able to type your Q&A, your questions, so that the panelists can answer them in the Q&A option. These are the learning objectives of our webinar. So this event is directed towards discussing the expertise and the skills of pharmacy laboratory educators in remote laboratory instruction, identify the best practices and skills we are able to get from this experience, discuss the methods of assessment for laboratory courses, elaborate on the challenges of this new norm of teaching we are moving towards, with a special focus on teaching laboratory courses, and also to highlight on how pharmacy laboratory research was handled during the time we spent during out of lab periods. I am very happy to thank the co-organizers and the planning committee for this webinar. Namely, I have to mention Sean Gleason, who was the first to guide me and all of us through this experience. Also Toyin Tufeidi from Howard University, who is the Academic Capacity Global Lead, and also Nilhan Uzman, who is the Lead for Education Policy and Implementation at FIP. Thank you all for making this event possible. I am also happy to introduce our dear panelists who are going to share their experience today. I'm happy to welcome Indiram Pather from the College of Pharmacy, Howard University, Susan Finstrom from the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy, Peter Rice from the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy as well, and a third colleague from the same school, Dr. Tom Androkoi, who is going to highlight on his experience in research during our webinar. Welcome also to Chelsea Baker from Purdue University, who is going to share some virtual experiences. Also welcome to Jamie Woodyard from Purdue University College of Pharmacy, who is going to share together with Chelsea some of their experience in clean rooms. Welcome to Nicolette Samot Bartolo from the University of Malta Department of Pharmacy, who is going to share her experience from this part of the world, namely in Europe. Welcome to Edmond Ottozadi, who is going to share his experience from Ghana, from the Department of Pharmacognosy, Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Welcome also to Susanna Abdel Fattah. She is my colleague from the Lebanese International University School of Pharmacy. Welcome to Malaika Turner, Clinical Assistant Professor at Howard University College of Pharmacy. And finally, welcome to Ranam Haidli, our student representative, who is going to share some of the student experience. In order to not keep so late on this, I'm going to introduce our panelists when each talk is on hold. And I would like to move now to our first discussion with Professor Endiran Pather. Professor Endiran Pather is a pharmaceutics professor with extensive industry experience focusing on buccal, sublingual drug delivery, tablets, cosmetics, and sunscreen development. He has commercialized many novel pharmaceutical products as well, and he masters the formulation records and compounding records for phase 1 clinical study materials. Dr. Endiran Pather is going to highlight on high-flex compounding lab, which is a response to lab needs under COVID-19 conditions. So Professor Pather, would you please join us and start?
Thank you. Thank you, Dalal. And greetings and welcome to viewers all over the world. My topic is high-flex compounding lab. So I will explain the terminology in the next slide. So this terminology, firstly, as it relates to classroom teaching. Hybrid is a term that's used when the coursework is partly online and partly in class with a fixed schedule. For example, you come to class every Friday and the rest of the time you watch these streaming videos. High-flex is derived from hybrid and flexible. This was developed at San Francisco State University to suit some of their working professional students. Most of the time lectures would be streamed, and on certain days when students are available, they would then attend class. So we are using this same model for our didactic lectures, and we've adapted it also for the lab. The lab will consist mainly of videos that are streamed online with a few labs with social distancing. Students will be assigned to specific time slots, and attendance is not mandatory. Therefore, we refer to this as flexible. And I will talk more about this in the next slide. So the online component will first be described. We have several TAs who assist with these labs, and these TAs will be each assigned a few preparations, for example, suppositories, and they will practice making these products until they are really good at it. They will consult with the professor who's instructing that particular formulation, and when they are proficient, they will record a virtual reality video with a special camera. The videos of most of the preparations in the syllabus will be prepared, and these, it's important to note, it includes those preparations that will be made hands-on. Why do we do that? We want students to review the videos ahead of time so that when they come to class, they will be prepared and they'll be efficient and not fumbling, and just make their prep. And you'll see why in the next slide, where we've got several sessions going one after the other. So in these videos, we will, of course, show the preparation from the beginning to the end, but we will emphasize certain points where the procedure is really important or where there are common errors. Now, these are photographs, but if you look at this, the photograph on the left, that is, you'll see peeping out there a mold for lollipops, and that is a PEG-based mixture that we are using to fill the lollipop mold. When it attains that whitish color, it's getting ready to pour, otherwise it's very translucent. Had this been a video, I could have lifted the beaker and rotated it to show the viscosity. Also on the right, you'll see the lollipop, the uppermost lollipop has a slight depression, and that is where the stick joins the lollipop itself. And that is because PEG contracts a great deal on cooling, and that could be a teaching point. But students should be careful not to make lollipops that are underfilled, as I've intentionally done in the next two, just to illustrate. The next two lollipops have not been trimmed well, so that's another teaching point. We can go on to the next video, to the next slide. So could we go on to the next slide, please? All right, so the next point I want to tackle is about the videos themselves, and Howard University is presently deep cleaning the entire building, and the labs are not open yet. So we are not able to make the video recordings, but we'll show you a sample recording in this link. It's to do with safety, but at least it illustrates what we're trying to do. As we just wait for that recording to open, again, it's on safety. Now, if you had digital goggles, you would really see a beautiful picture. It would appear that you're right in the room with the student who's demonstrating.
This is a laboratory HID safety virtual reality video. First, make sure to put on your protective gloves and safety goggles. It's important to wear proper shoes while working in the laboratory. Do not wear open-toed shoes. You can use 70% isopropyl alcohol to clean inside and outside of the HID.
I think we can go on from here. We can end the video. All right, so having seen that video, I want to describe a comparison between the regular lab and a high-flex lab as we propose doing. So in the high-flex lab, we will have shorter lab periods supplemented with videos of all other lab exercises. We're going to have, in the normal 3-hour block, we will have 2 shorter 1.5-hour lab sessions. Instead of working in groups, we will have students working individually. We cannot have them working in groups. They will be spaced out, a sufficient distance between them. And in both types, the regular labs and the high flex, we tend to make just one kind of dosage form at each lab session. But instead of 3 or 4 formulations of that type, such as suspensions, we will have only one formulation in the high flex labs. Whereas we were grading typical lab reports, now we will have questions on all formulations, the one that the student made in the lab, as well as those they viewed in the video, and we'll talk more about this in the next slide. Before we discuss the assessment, just something on the protection. All students coming onto the campus will be tested for COVID-19. If you test positive, you will not be allowed to come onto campus. Also, there will be personal protection equipment supplied for the labs. This includes face masks, which you will wear before you enter the lab, and of course, gloves and eye protection as shown in the video. There will be a temperature check as they enter the lab and very specific sanitization procedures that have been worked out by the university. Briefly, each student will wipe down their lab bench, stool, and whatever they're using, the whole area, before and after use of that area. All students must exit the lab from the first session before the next session of students enters. You'll remember that we've got 2 lots of students in a 3-hour block. The professor is the last to leave the lab, and as we change to the next slide, I'll just mention the professor has to sanitize anything remaining, including the door handles, and then the professor leaves the lab. So we can go on to the next slide. So here I want to talk about potential issues with this whole setup that we have, because there are some issues. Firstly, we've got now 3 lab sessions, 2 mini sessions in each session. Therefore, 6 lots of students. A student arriving at the wrong time can be a problem. Students, as typical students are, if they arrive late, that's going to be an issue. We're working to a very tight schedule. The sanitization procedure and the fact that you've got to wear all this protective equipment potentially could cause stress to the students. Students are going to be told to maintain a social distance, but what if they do not? One area may be at the balance or at the fume hood, which is only used for volatile solvents. We have enough balances to give 1 per student for the limited class size. But if you have a situation where they are sharing, that could be a problem. A simple one, like the bench containers of chemicals, if they run short, in a typical lab, it's not a big deal. Somebody goes to find chemicals and there's something else the student can continue with. With this type of format, it may be more critical. Assessment will be questions on the understanding that the student has of basic lab procedures, the formulation components that he or she is using. For instance, what's the difference between PEG 400 and PEG 4000? Lab safety issues, correct labeling, suitability of a specific dosage form for a particular therapeutic outcome, and then does the student know the proper instructions, because they're going to instruct the patient, and we're going to emphasize calculations. So as we go over to the next slide, I'll mention students generally have some difficulty with calculations, and we saw this as a way of emphasizing it. So some final thoughts. The COVID-19 situation is changing almost daily. Levels are going up, they're going down. We cannot control that. We believe that the model we are using can be easily modified in either direction. So on the left, you will see a fully online situation, and on the extreme right, where we could use fully lab-based classes. We are somewhere on that blue line with one formulation made hands-on and 3 formulations where the student would review a video. We can change that easily. We can move the blue line to the left and make it fully online if the situation gets worse. We can move it to the right and have more students in the lab, perhaps 2 formulations per lab. And it's possible to even go to 2.5 formulations, where the technician prepares a lot of the material and the student just does limited steps. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleague Simon Wang, who prepared the video that we displayed. Please keep in mind, students would view this with the virtual reality goggles. And when they're looking at that, it'll be almost like they're standing in the lab. And he will be our consultant for the rest of the videos that we are preparing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Pather, for this detailed explanation and for your insights into the virtual reality use of the lab. I would like to move from virtual reality into compounding. So our next speaker is Professor Susan Finstrom from the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Professor Finstrom is a compounding pharmacist. She graduated from the University of Colorado Pharmacy School, and she has worked in compounding pharmacies in community settings for more than 20 years. Professor Finstrom team teaches compounding electives and also gives basic introduction to sterile compounding for pharmacy students. She is going to discuss adjusting compounding courses due to campus changes during COVID-19. Welcome, Professor Finstrom.
Thank you, Dalal, and thank you for the opportunity for the professors from the University of Colorado to share what is happening on our campus. In the next slide, I'd like to share what happened last semester. I teach, as was said, the compounding lab for sterile preparations, and we present a lecture and have reading and a quiz that all the students can attend or watch online, and then do the quiz before they come to the laboratory. We have 4 hoods in our sterile compounding lab, so I take 4 students at a time for 1.5 hours into that sterile compounding room. Because of COVID-19, only half of the students got that experience, and we substituted for the other half of the students that they could watch 2 videos, one that showed the hand washing and garbing procedure, and another one that showed withdrawing medication from a sterile vial. If and when feasible, we hope that we can offer to those students that miss the hands-on experience, excuse me, excuse me, an opportunity to come 1 student at a time into the lab. For our compounding elective this fall, we have to go through an an application process for in-person learning. This is an ongoing process. We are looking like we will be able to actually have students in our lab. The class size is going to be limited to approximately 50% of what we would normally take for the elective. We don't know exactly yet how many students we'll have. There will be a campus check-in policy where there's a questionnaire that they have to submit about whether they've been exposed to someone with COVID-19, and they have their temperature checked, and then they will come into lab. I just found out that the sanitization process will actually be completed by the janitorial service after we exit the room, but the students will be responsible for alcoholing down their own work areas just to make sure that all areas are covered that they potentially touch. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about how we're going to incorporate hybrid learning. We hope to have the students continue in their normal reading assignments, and they can do a quiz online through our learning management software. The three of us, Dr. Rice, Dr. Antradoki, and myself, will hold most likely a synchronous Zoom session. It possibly could be asynchronous if the student wants to watch it at a different time, because it will be recorded. We will discuss the dosage forms being prepared that day. Dr. Antradoki discusses the pharmaceutical principles of importance. We talk about the top types of ingredients used in the dosage form. And then Dr. Rice and I talk about the clinical use of the dosage form. We're going to prepare demonstrations of the techniques that are required, and students can come to the compounding lab to prepare the preparations for 2 to 3 hours. Thank you. I'll allow Dr. Rice to take over at this point.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Finstrom. I will be moving now also in pharmaceutics to Professor Peter Rice. Professor Rice received his BS in pharmacy from Northeastern University and his PhD from the Ohio State University, his PharmD from the University of Kentucky. Dr. Rice has experience in community and compounding pharmacy and currently practices in ambulatory care. He also coordinates pharmaceutics and compounding student laboratories at the University of Colorado. We would like to know from Professor Rice his experience in kitchen-based labs during COVID-19. Professor Rice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and greetings from Denver. It's looking like it's going to be a very sunny day here in the American West. So if we can go to the next slide. Our P1 Pharmaceutics course is a 4-credit-hour course. We have about 3.5 or 4 hours of didactic class during the semester, and then we supplement with 6 labs plus a sterile products lab. Now, Sue has already talked about our sterile products lab. We were sort of taken by surprise with COVID and got about halfway through our lab series for the course in the spring. Our first lab does weights and measures, where we try and make sure that our students understand how to measure volumes and weights, simply measuring things in syringes and various graduated cylinders. We have a dissolution and assay lab where we use ascorbic acid, and students use pH meters to understand pH better, a major part of the course. We have a capsule lab where the students will pack capsules. Those labs we finished. When our school announced that we would be doing remote teaching, I did not realize that I would be remote. I just thought the students would be remote, and that we would be able to do some more live lab demonstrations straight out of our pharmaceutics lab. So we were left with 3 labs: solutions, suspensions, and topicals. And for those labs, I decided to fall back on doing some of those labs, from my kitchen, which seemed a little bit unusual, but many of the techniques that we use in pharmaceutics, I'll discuss on the next slide. And so the goals of our lab are to reinforce our concepts and didactic material. In initial compounding labs, we're often teaching less pharmaceutics, and we're supplementing pharmaceutics, but we're teaching techniques, how to measure things, how to mix things together well. In our compounding courses and in our pharmaceutics course, once we get going in compounding, I like to emphasize some of the choices that compounders will make in terms of vehicles and flavors and the design of formulations, because we like to emphasize the fact that compounding is a clinically oriented pharmacy activity that is serving individual patients with individual dosage forms. So I emphasize right from the start, even without COVID, that pharmaceutics and compounding techniques, those of measuring things and mixing things together in the proper way, are universal techniques. And I always end up saying, if you can make a good emulsion, you can make good gravy. And I emphasize to our students that, pay attention in pharmaceutics, we will make you better cooks. So if anything happens to pharmacy, you can always go out there and make a living cooking. So on the next slide, again, our remote teaching began after spring break, and we suddenly found ourselves with no access to either laboratories or chemicals. Our group, Sue Finstrom, who just talked, Tom Antrodoki, who was after me, and myself, we talked about various things we could do with our laboratories. We had the option from the university to delay labs until the students returned to campus. We could remove the lab content from the course, or we could do the best we can, and that turned out to be compounding from my kitchen. And we decided we wanted to keep the lab content in the course because it was a major portion of the students' grades. And we felt that the students would be in limbo, not really knowing if they pass pharmaceutics or not, or a large number of the students, or many students would anyway, not know what their true status in the course if they didn't have that portion of their grade. So what we did was, come up with some compounding in the kitchen, and the next slide will tell something about that. And my favorite lab that we did from the kitchen was a Caesar salad dressing. And Caesar salad dressing is a nice example of an emulsion. It has everything that we want in pharmaceutics labs. It has trituration of solid ingredients. It has creation of an emulsion through a combination of an aqueous phase and a lipid phase. The students are sometimes surprised to learn that we're not adding our typical emulsifying agents that we'll talk about in pharmaceutics, where there are no spans, there are no tweens. People are bringing together their phases in the kitchen using other types of ingredients. In this case, a raw egg yolk. One of the benefits of doing a Caesar salad dressing recipe is people used to have fresh Caesar salad dressings when they would go to a very fine restaurant. Never do we see that now in today's current environment and worrying about microbial growth. So that it's their chance to do something unusual and taste something that might actually broaden their horizons. We decided to include the full recipe, so we had trituration of solid ingredients, which was anchovies and salt. We had combination of the ingredients in a mortar and pestle that we we did, and then in the end we combined all the ingredients together, and that was all on the lab session, which I recorded the day before our live class. I reported back on the taste the next day. My wife and I had that for lunch. We digitally recorded the presentation, as I said, a day or two before, for the synchronous class. So we did our presentation so that the students would see, would see everything, but they were all seeing it as a class. We had a chance to discuss that. We kept our usual handouts. We had more discussion to accommodate for not seeing our students in class. We also had a number of online practice quizzes. So we tried to make sure that the students had every opportunity to both see and think about the lab experience they would have had if they were in class. So the next slide summarizes what we've learned from doing this. When our kitchen pharmaceutics labs provided an alternative to canceling our lab sessions, we felt the demonstrations were, for some students, more engaging than the scientific sessions. The students found it more interesting, mixing together a recipe that they could taste, as opposed to mixing together our kaolin pectin emulsion, which or suspension that we would usually do in class. Students can try the recipes and the techniques at home, and they can be better cooks for having gone through this particular lab experience. In terms of improvement, I think finding the right recipe is really essential. We were looking for a recipe that was relatively simple in terms of the ingredients, and that was fairly easy to find. We wanted something that would show the techniques, and that was fairly easy to find. I want something that tastes better than what we had tried so far. So we'll continue to look in case we end up needing a recipe in the future. The right equipment is also very helpful. I was fortunate that in my kitchen we had the balances. We have several mortar and pestles, and we were able to put this together using the techniques. The next lab that we did after the Caesar salad dressing was a cake icing that was meant to show some of the techniques in mixing together creams and ointments. And for that, we did not have the right size spatula, so we ended up mixing up things with these like 10-inch spatulas that didn't turn out quite so well as if we had the right size one. But the students got to see that when we're developing things in the kitchen, just as when we're developing things for the first time in the compounding setting, sometimes things don't go perfect, and you accommodate next time around. So that is my presentation. I will turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Tom Antrodoki.
Thank you, Professor Rice. So compounding is delicious at the end of the day. It does not only teach pharmaceutics, but it's also a bit of joy and interest for students, as I can see from your kitchen experience. Thank you. I will be moving now to Professor Tom Antrodoki, also from the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy. Professor Antrodoki has been on the faculty for more than 20 years, and he has research focused on drug delivery as well as formulation of drugs, and he teaches the compounding course for the PharmD program. Dr. Antrodoki is going to highlight on his experience regarding laboratory research during the time of COVID-19. Professor Antrodoki, the floor is yours.
Go to the next slide. Basically, my presentation isn't as tasty as Dr. Rice's, but I'll just give you a brief update as to what happened. So, the university announced in fairly short order that we were going to shut down the labs, and they only gave us really a couple days warning. So these are the research labs we're talking about, not the compounding lab. Although the same thing happened in the compounding lab. So we were in on a Friday. We were told by the dean, this was going to, I think March 13th was a Friday. They said, we're going to close down, and then they were closed down.
Sorry, we cannot hear you. Sorry, we cannot properly hear you.
I'm unmuted. Let's see here. How about now? Is that any better?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the university didn't give us a whole lot of warning. about shutting down the labs. So they shut down the labs, and this was, obviously very challenging for those of us who, rely on our research labs to generate data, to write grants and papers, etc. That pretty much shut us down. And then after a couple of months, we were allowed to restart gradually. So initially, we were only allowed to have one person in the lab. And most labs like mine have 4 or 5 people. So originally, we were just allowed to have one person. And they worked for about, a month or so. And they had to be gowned and masked and all that. And there was no problem with one person in the lab in terms of social distancing. And then about a month later, a second person was allowed to be in the lab, but they had to maintain social distance. So they were 6 feet apart. And so this makes it difficult to train anyone. In fact, it makes it impossible to train anyone. And then on the next slide, ultimately, we're allowed to have more people, but only 2 people in the lab at one time. And so we have one person in my lab works in the middle of the night. She comes in at midnight and she works late in the morning, and then she wipes down the lab and leaves. And then 2 people come in, and there's a 4th person who comes in on the weekends and works. So we're only allowed to have 2 people in the lab at one time. And so the reality is this not only slowed my lab down, but for individual PhD students, they lost time on their thesis work. So that was detrimental for them. And as we've heard from Dr. Rice and Dr. Finstrom, the classes that, the compounding class, but also just the didactic lectures, they continued remotely, as I imagine most universities did. But this is still a challenge. And the big challenge we're facing now is that we have a new crop of PhD students coming in to start in the fall, and they don't know how to use the lab, right? All the people I've been talking about are people who are already trained. They already know what instruments to use. But we have new people coming in, and so it's unclear how we're going to be able to train them in the fall if we can't get within 6 feet of them. And of course, we're limited on how many people can be in the lab anyway. So that's going to be a real challenge. We just talked about that yesterday at a faculty meeting. And it's unclear exactly how we're going to do that. You can't really visually or virtually teach, a lot of these lab skills very effectively, So anyway, we're working through that. And I think every lab will probably have a different solution to that problem. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Tom, for this elaboration. So mostly you have had your students work on their thesis and their papers instead of having to be stuck in the lab in small numbers. So I think that's what you meant, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on now to our next speakers. I would like to welcome Chelsea Baker and Jamie Woodyard from Purdue University. Dr. Chelsea Baker has completed Health System Pharmacy Administration residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital. She coordinates the second lab at Purdue University and is a clinical pharmacist at the Center for Healthy Living. Her research interests include medication safety, outpatient pharmacy, as well as teaching and learning methodology. At the same time, we will be also welcoming Dr. Jamie Woodyard, who received her PhD from Purdue University and completed community pharmacy residency at the University of North Carolina, followed by academic fellowship in pharmaceutical care labs. She is the director of the professional program laboratories and a clinical pharmacist at the Center for Healthy Living at Purdue University. So from our previous discussion about compounding and research, we're going to move now into sterile compounding. So what do you ladies have to tell us about sterile compounding?
Yes, hi, thanks Bilal, and thank you to FIP also for having us here to talk a little bit about our use of a virtual clean room at Purdue University. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've used this at Purdue, and as well as a little bit about our skills lab curriculum. So the virtual clean room actually was something that we used at Purdue prior to COVID. So this is something that we had been investigating as a way to have more remote or kind of online pre-lab or post-lab activities for our students. So at Purdue University, our skills lab crosses the first 3 years of our PharmD curriculum. So our P1, 2, and 3 students have a skills lab component each semester of their curriculum. The virtual clean room, oh, thank you. The virtual clean room is currently used only in the first year of the program. This is actually the pilot that we tried this past spring of this 2020. So the virtual clean room activities, will show you an example of those in a second, but they were used to complement and reinforce some hands-on sterile product compounding, as you can see in the slide pictures there. So really one of the bigger reasons that we wanted to use the virtual clean room is, as you can see, we have these small demonstration hoods, but we didn't really have a true clean room environment for our students to practice in. So we wanted them to have a way to virtually kind of look at or see or experience a clean room environment that didn't necessarily require us to spend a lot of money completely revamping our skills lab space for the 2 labs that we actually have and house in our skills lab curriculum. So our plan really next year is to expand it to our second year lab and incorporate some of those hazardous and chemotherapy medication scenarios in that lab as well. So in the next slide, I'm actually going to be showing a video of what the virtual clean room looks like, and then I will briefly explain what some of the different modalities can do as well.
To the Virtual Interactive Clean Room, a USP 797 certified training environment for on-demand practice and assessment of technique and the compounding of sterile products. The Virtual Clean Room is a simulation created by pharmacists who saw a need for enhanced safety-focused training on sterile product compounding. The Clean Room includes options for training and assessment for a range of products, including adult, pediatric, and hazardous medications. All products contain real-world labels. Our simulation reinforces personal protective equipment, pharmaceutical calculations, and specific techniques essential for accurate and safe preparation of parenteral products. Our practice option provides feedback, while the testing mode tracks performance data when users make choices, identifying rule of first error and other inconsistencies in their clean room process decisions. This one-of-a-kind experience can be accessed from anywhere in the world to facilitate training and certification in sterile product preparation. Welcome to the virtual.
Thank you. It looks like we were having a little bit of. There we go. I think it's actually
certified training environment for on-demand practice and assessment of technique and the compounding of sterile products. The Virtual Clean Room is a simulation created by pharmacists who saw a need for enhanced safety-focused training on sterile product compounding. The Clean Room includes options for training and assessment for a range of products, including adult, pediatric, and hazardous medications. All products contain real-world labels. Our simulation reinforces use of personal protective equipment, pharmaceutical calculations, and specific techniques essential for accurate and safe preparation of parenteral products. Our practice option provides feedback, while the testing mode tracks performance data when users make choices, identifying rule of first error and other inconsistencies in their clean room process decisions. This one-of-a-kind experience can be accessed from anywhere in the world to facilitate training and certification in sterile product preparation. Find out more through Penguin Innovations.
All right, so thank you for sharing that video, and hopefully that gave you and all of our participants a little bit better of an understanding of really the environment that we're having some of our students practice in as part of this virtual clean room environment. So I should say Penguin Innovations is a subsidiary or a company of Purdue University. So it was developed here in-house at Purdue, and so we are very proud of the different things we've been able to do with that. But I'm going to walk you through next just kind of what some of those different modes looked like. Then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jamie Woodyard, to talk about some of the research that we've done with this to show the effect and benefit for our students. The first mode that you have is a tutorial mode. This essentially walks you through some practice opportunities, both gowning and garbing, as well as will literally show you kind of that path of first error when you're working both in horizontal and vertical flow hood environment. You may have seen on the very first part of that video that this is NAPRA and then USP 797 compatible. They are working on USP 800 that is in development, and we are very excited to use that once it is live. But in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the practice mode. And so essentially the practice mode is a little bit like the tutorial. It's going to help guide the users as they go through it and complete the activities. But it does provide immediate feedback to our students, which is very helpful, especially since we can't be there in the room with them and their computers, you know, walking them through these different scenarios. It does provide some warning messages and helps prevent errors, but also that performance is recorded, so we can go back with the students and review that with them and talk about different areas and opportunities for improvement in the future. So in the next slide, we'll talk about the test mode. The test mode is really simulating kind of what you think of that real world experience. So you're taking away all of the different images, you're taking away all of the first air blocking and kind of visuals that show you exactly kind of how you're compounding in a sterile hood environment, and no feedback is provided until the very end. So the performance is recorded. You can go back through that with the students as well and talk through the different errors that occurred. But again, kind of simulating that true real world scenario when they wouldn't have that safety net of that computer generated images for them. All right, so the next slide, I'm going to actually hand it over to my colleague, Jamie Woodyard, and she's going to talk a little bit about the research, and then we'll wrap up at the end and share a little bit more about the Penguin Innovations Virtual Clean Room.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you to the FIP for hosting this informative webinar as we all navigate laboratory instruction amidst COVID-19, and for the opportunity to share our virtual clean room experiences with you all today. I'm going to shift gears a bit, as Chelsea mentioned, and briefly discuss research that has been conducted on the virtual clean room, starting with some recent data gathered this spring. As Chelsea mentioned, we use the virtual clean room in a sterile compounding laboratory with first-year Doctor of Pharmacy students. Prior to the laboratory, students completed tutorials within the virtual clean room, and then the actual 3-hour laboratory consisted of virtual clean room activities in addition to in-person, hands-on sterile compounding stations. We wanted to determine if the virtual clean room in conjunction with the hands-on activities improve students' confidence in sterile compounding procedures. To assess this, we developed pre and post surveys where students indicated their confidence with various sterile compounding procedures using a 5-point scale, where 1 represented highly unconfident and 5 represented highly confident. The pre-survey was administered to our 151 first-year students before any pre-lab or lab activities, and then the near identical post-lab survey was administered after the completion of all lab activities. We then compared median responses of pre and post surveys. On the next slide, I will share the results. The results can be found on the next slide, please. The data from 140 students were included in the analyses, representing a response rate of 93%. There were 10 procedural items on which students ranked their confidence, and a statistically significant increase in median response of student confidence after the lab was observed for all 10 survey items. 5 of those items are listed on the slide here, and as you can see, after the laboratory, students were more confident in gowning, garbing, cleaning and preparing a laminar flow hood, gathering necessary supplies, and using references such as package inserts, all of which are features on which the virtual clean room focuses. Additional results can be found on the next slide. The remaining 5 items are listed here, with student confidence increasing in sterile compounding procedures in both horizontal and vertical laminar flow hoods, as well as in both anterooms and clean rooms. The scope of this virtual experience is unique because colleges of pharmacy may not have the setup or resources to expose students to different types of hoods or what a real anteroom or clean room consists of, as creation of such physical simulated spaces may not be available. An increase in student confidence in recognizing when first air is blocked was not a surprising finding for us, as students really enjoy the feature of the virtual clean room in practice mode, where the field of first air is represented visually and students are provided red warnings in real time if they block first air. This may in fact better detect if students block first air than if one was to visually assess this in person. And on the next slide, I will discuss a question that was on the post survey only. So one limitation of the study is obviously that the virtual clean room was not assessed independently of other hands-on activities in the laboratory. However, we did ask students whether the virtual clean room helped prepare them for hands-on sterile compounding, and as you can see here, the majority of our students did agree the virtual clean room helped prepare them for real-life sterile compounding. Anecdotally, I will add that overall the students really seem to enjoy the virtual clean room, especially the ability to practice in an environment where it's safe to make mistakes and learn from them. Some students have commented that it takes a little bit of time to become familiar and get comfortable with all the different things that can and or should be done in the clean room as well as within the system itself, but they appreciated the exposure to the supplies and procedures necessary for sterile compounding, as well as the need to use actual references to guide the preparation of sterile medications in a realistic manner. Another limitation is that the study looked at student confidence rather than skill-based performance, so an important next step for us is to determine how the virtual clean room impacts learner competency. However, before the clean room was web-based, it was actually offered in a technology center located on Purdue's campus through the use of 3D glasses and wireless handheld controllers that students use to navigate the clean room. This older version of the clean room was incorporated into a required parenteral products course for third-year Doctor of Pharmacy students, and a study published in the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education in 2011 illustrated that student scores on written examinations in the course significantly improved after implementation of the virtual clean room. While we do not currently have data on the impact of the newer web-based clean room on knowledge or skill-based performance, this is something we are beginning to explore. Another item the developers are working on is the incorporation of closed transfer devices into the virtual clean room activities. In addition, a question that we get asked a lot is if the clean room has total parenteral nutrition activities, and while it currently does not, that is something that's currently being considered. So I'll wrap up by saying that while this program was developed and has been in use for years now, we are definitely glad to have it as a tool to augment our lab experience during COVID-19. If you would like more information on the virtual clean room, feel free to visit the clean room website located on the next slide. If you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, you'll see an option to request a demo where you can enter your information and then download a free demo. There is a fee associated with use of the virtual clean room, and if you would like more information on that, please contact the faculty member who created the virtual clean room, Steve Abel. You are also more than welcome to reach out to Chelsea and or me if you have questions or if you would like to further discuss the use of the virtual clean room, whether that be in the pandemic or even beyond. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Bartolo.
Thank you, Jamie and Chelsea, for this interesting information. And actually, I have got many questions in the Q&A portal about whether the virtual clean room is free and whether pharmacy schools could have tutorials or could learn to use the virtual clean room available at Purdue University for their use. So do you have something to add regarding that?
Hi, Dalal. I'll forward that. Or, sorry, I'll take the question. So yes, there is potentially, you can send a note to Steve Abel to ask about demos of the virtual clean room, and as well as find out different pricing options for the number of students or even pharmacy technicians that you may want to train in this environment. Right now, there is not a free version available online, but the really nice thing about the virtual clean room is it is available in an online format. So you don't need a CD, you don't need a specific software program. You actually can access this online. But I would strongly encourage you to visit that website, the Penguin Innovations, or send a note to Steve Abel for more information.
Okay, thank you for that. So our attendees can now have access to the information you can deliver to them via these websites. Thank you once more. I will be moving now to Dr. Nicolette Samut-Bartolo from the University of Malta Department of Pharmacy. Dr. Bartolo graduated as a pharmacist and obtained her PhD from the University of Malta, and she is involved in teaching related to pharmaceutical technology, which she is going to tell us about today, and also green practices. She coordinates compounding, pharmaceutics, and pharmaceutical technology practices. Nicolette, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dalal. So I'm going to start with an overview of the undergraduate programs which the Department of Pharmacy offers. As we can see in the next slide, currently we offer 2 undergraduate programs: the Bachelor of Science in Pharmaceutical Technology, which is a 3-year program and is more industry-oriented and aimed for individuals who are interested in processes such as those related to manufacturing and also to regulatory sciences, for example, for quality assurance and quality control aspects. And we also have the degree which leads to the pharmacy profession, and it's a 4+1 degree which gives the students the warrant to practice as a pharmacist. So both these programs have various study units which include laboratory practicals such as pharmaceutics, medicinal chemistry, pharmaceutical technology and compounding. And these practicals take place during different periods throughout the scholastic year. As we can see in the next slide, apart from having some study units, such as pharmaceutical technology, which solely consists of the practical component, we have other study units, such as compounding, which are divided into 3 components. There is the didactic part, where students learn the theoretical aspect related to the topic. And in the case of compounding, students are also taught the calculation aspect related to the subject. And we also have the practical discussion, which this part takes place before the actual practical session, whereby in the case of the compounding practicals, students are shown videos related to the techniques which are used for the practical session, such as how to compound, how to prepare creams and ointments. And after a discussion, then the students will then proceed to the 3rd component, which is the actual hands-on practical session. However, before we expose the students to these 3 pillars, these 3 components, as we can see in the next slide, students have to first in the first year of their study, before they attend the first practical sessions, they have to attend an introductory session about the laboratory quality system, whereby they are taught about health and safety aspects related to working in the lab, and they are also introduced to the quality system which is available at our department, with the aim to instill the concept of quality, awareness, accountability, and verification among students from the first days of their program. And the quality system consists of standard operating procedures, such as the general ones, which are related to good laboratory practice and training, as well as health and safety. And then there are also the SOPs for the appropriate use of the respective equipment. Apart from that, students are also exposed to material safety data sheets. They are taught the concept and how to use them, and we have these data sheets available for chemicals which are available in our laboratories, and they are the chemicals which the students will be handling throughout the practical sessions. And apart from the system, we also have a QR code system where students can scan the QR code, which is present on each equipment in the lab, to access the SOP of that particular equipment, just in case they need to have a look at the SOP throughout the session. All students are requested to read the relevant SOPs before joining the actual practical. So as we can see in the next slide, next scholastic year in November, we will be facing different scenarios. In November, we will start with the compounding practical sessions, and we will be faced with 2 different scenarios, whether we are going to carry out the practicals in the lab as in-lab practical sessions, or else virtually. And this all depends on the COVID-19 situation at that time. So if we look at the next slide, we can see the different precautions which one should take in the eventuality that in-lab practical sessions are carried out to ensure a safe environment and also to maintain social distancing. So first of all, each and every individual needs to have the temperature checked before they actually enter the building, the university building, and they will be asked to use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer before they get into the lab. Apart from that, we will also limit the number of students which will attend the practical sessions. Before the COVID-19 situation, the maximum number was 10. However, now we will be following the guidelines issued by the Superintendent of Public Health, whereby the guidelines state that there should be a minimum distance of 2 meters between two individuals, or else a minimum of 4 meters squared per person, to have enough space where to work, while at the same time maintaining social distance. If this should be an issue, one should use tempered glass screens, and also in that eventuality, masks or visor must also be worn at all times. So it also depends on the size of the laboratory. Some other precautions which should be looked at include ventilation in the laboratory, and also one should keep the doors and windows open to avoid having recirculated air in the laboratory. And as much as possible, one should also use extractors to improve air circulation. However, it's important that these are thoroughly cleaned every time. The cleaning aspect, when it comes to working in the lab, it's important that after each group session, the laboratory is cleaned well with alcohol, minimum 70% alcohol-based solutions. And special attention should be given to surfaces which are frequently touched, including the doorknobs. When it comes to also the groups which can access the practical session, it is important that the students are advised to retain the same group so as not to risk infecting different groups if you have mixed approach. In the next slide, we're going to look at the virtual practical session. I mean, in the eventuality where the practical session needs to be carried out, the didactic component and preparatory session can be conducted virtually in any case. However, we will have challenges related to the hands-on practical sessions. A possible scenario for these virtual sessions would be to have the demonstrator present in the lab and connecting with the students online, and the students will have the possibility of participating and interacting during the practical session, such as by being asked what should be the next step maybe, or else to describe the correct technique which should be used during the practical, or else they can also be shown different techniques and the students would need to identify which is the correct one. Then another aspect related to the virtual practical session is that these are more principles oriented compared to the traditional hands-on approach, which we are more accustomed to. And unfortunately, with these sessions, there is a risk that the skills which are learned during the regular hands-on sessions might be affected since they are not taking place. Another challenge for the virtual practical sessions is the assessment aspect. Students, one way of assessing students is to base the assessment on interaction and also on the knowledge about the procedure. And one can set or develop a set of pre-established criteria for the different practical sessions and grade the student accordingly. And with the assessment criteria, we are more testing the problem-solving skills related to the procedure. So to conclude, and as one can see in the next slide, one should evaluate their setting and the situation in relation to COVID-19 pandemic and apply sound scientific knowledge to ensure a safe space for both students and staff while still being able to transmit the key learning points. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicolette, for this elaboration. And we'll be moving now to Dr. Edmund Ekodzi, who is a senior lecturer at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology from Ghana. He obtained his PhD in pharmacology, and his research focuses on identifying anti-infective and anti-inflammatory candidates from pure compounds or extracts of natural origin and to control their quality. Edmund is going to highlight over the internet-based experiments that he carried for his PhD students during COVID-19 lockdown. Edmund, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dalal, and welcome to everyone. So here at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, I should say that we have what we call a central laboratory. Now, there's a university-wide shared lab that offers state-of-the-art equipment to researchers and students. And beside my teaching duties, I happen to head this facility. What that means is that I get to interact with a lot of colleagues who are training PhDs and master level students. And so a lot of what I would be talking about today would just be focused on PG training here in Ghana and our experiences with online learning and also online experiments. So when national bodies gave us strict restrictions on COVID-19 and we had a lockdown for close to a month, one of the things we had to do was think through quickly and see how it is that we can improve the service we offer to researchers here at KN University. One of the things that we could easily do was that we could go remote with our NMR experiments. For other equipment we had, it was almost difficult to get this done, but with NMR, it was pretty easy. So what happened is that usually we always have one person on hand, one or two persons on hand to do with the usual weekly refills of liquid nitrogen. So when it is that there's a student or a researcher who needs to run an experiment and they are still locked down on campus, they can submit their samples to us, we take them, prepare the samples, and then we do the whole NMR run remotely. So we make use of a remote control software, and one particular one we used often was the Team Viewer. And this helped us so that we could still get data for researchers so they could make up their mind on the next steps they had to take. So that's it for what we did regarding remote laboratories. Besides remote laboratories, we've also been engaged in, myself and some of my colleagues here have been engaged in remote learning, or what you call virtual learning. Now here, and this, Tom raised a point earlier about having first year PhD students who do not know how to use your equipment and all of that. So it's a problem also for us. But to help with our students and getting them familiarized with the procedures or the methods that they will be applying for their own research, what some of my colleagues have done is that they have got the students to go online, make use of online simulations and videos. And one particular tool that has been useful for most people is the journal or virtual experiment. So students are able to run through these videos and see for themselves how the experiments are being carried out. And then once these are done, these may be followed up with discussions. So groups, student groups with the lead supervisor come into virtual discussion rooms like what we are doing now. And then they try to, the lead supervisor tries to answer questions if there are questions. If there are things that need to be hammered out, they try to do these. Some also have moved on and tried to help these students understand some analysis that needs to be done and all of that. Now, just like other speakers have said, here we've also had some challenges. We've gone from students and even the researchers themselves feeling isolated, overwhelmed, and the usual situation, which is poor internet connection. And all we've done throughout these periods are the same things everyone else has done. we try to encourage people, let them know that if they feel overwhelmed, they need to speak with someone and have whatever it is that's bothering them dealt with. Regarding these Zoom calls, or let me say web conference calls, what we've also encouraged people, which is that take down your audio if you don't need to, mute yourself if you don't need to, put up your video also off. And all of these have helped. And but at this point now, we are also moving gradually into, we are easing our restrictions. And so what it means is that students are able to get back onto the campus, PhD students, I mean, and gradually getting themselves into the lab and trying to do their research work. But largely, we here at KNUST believe that we need to stay motivated and keep at it and learn all the different ways by which we can deliver our content to the students, whether doing virtual or doing face-to-face, or having a fine blend of these options until possibly we return to the normal state of affairs. Thanks.
Thank you, Edmund. And I think the audience will find like good insights into your presentation about the experiments done over the internet, as well as about the Jovi platform you have described. So maybe this will solve the problem for many of us who are looking for doing research during lockdown. Before we move on to our next speaker, I would like to remind our dear panelists to answer questions addressed to them through the Q&A portal, so that we have many questions answered before the end of this session. Moving on now to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Susanna Abdel Fattah. Dr. Susanna Abdel Fattah is a clinical instructor and community pharmacist with both MBA and PharmD degrees from the Faculty of Pharmacy, Lebanese International University. She teaches many courses within the Pharmaceutical Sciences Department, and she also is involved in community pharmacy practice. Her research interests include medication errors in outpatient settings and updates in parenteral administration. Dr. Susanna is going to show us the experience of our school in the Quantitative Analysis Lab. Susanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you today. Actually, COVID-19 has impacted the whole world in all sectors. Academic organizations had to walk into untested waters and cope with the situation in order to proceed, or in order to find solutions to proceed with the learning process. When talking about laboratory courses, the situation is more challenging. And today I will be spotting light on quantitative analysis, an absolute lab course that I had to deliver during the lockdown period during the spring semester of the academic year 1920. Going to the next slide. So to start with, quantitative analysis is a laboratory course, or quantitative analysis is about providing students with insights and skills in quantitative analysis, which is actually accomplished through the conduction of experiments. In the next slide, we're going to discuss the objectives of this course. We're going to discuss the main components of this course, which are the theory, the calculation, where students can start with the results of the experiment to reach actually the final concentration of a certain component. And finally, the practice, which is the actual conduction of the experiment. Moving to the next slide, we're going to discuss the objectives of this course. So the objectives include identifying analytical terms, detecting or determining the experimental errors, and using various techniques in order to draw out conclusions. Moving to the next slide. So before COVID-19, the teaching method was composed of two main components, the dry lab and the wet lab. The dry lab, which is actually about discussing the theoretical part in class, which includes the theory and also the calculations. The wet lab, which is the hands-on experiments, or which is the actual conduction of the experiment. What about the assessment method, which is going to be discussed in the next slide? So usually the final grade of a student is composed of 30% on reports, assignments, and quizzes, 5% on practical work evaluation, and 65% on written exams. Moving to the next slide. However, after COVID-19 invaded the world and social distancing became a must, we had to move from regular teaching to remote learning. So moving to the next slide, we're going to see the challenges that we have faced. The situation was hard. We had to face many challenges, including how to deliver calculation part through remotely, also how to compensate for the practical conduction of the experiment, how to conduct exams while keeping cheating at its minimum, and nevertheless, we have to mention that students were demotivated and they were resisting the new method. Moving to the next slide, we're going to see how did we cope with that. The previous one, please. The previous one also, please. So regarding the teaching method, amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, a new teaching methodology was designed, where Google Classroom was the adopted platform. So we had to organize, or we had to explain our experiments and post them through voiceover, PowerPoint, and PDF files. Also, in order to compensate for the practical part and to allow students to visualize the results, we have used the readily available YouTube simulation lab videos and posted them through Google Classroom. And to ensure that all of that was clearly stated or clearly reached to students, we scheduled live streaming sessions once per week. In the next slide, we're going to see how these how the material was posted on Google Classroom. So for example, for experiment 7, vitamin C analysis, you can see attached 2 parts for the voiceover PowerPoint. We have minimized, or we have limited the time allowed for each part to a maximum of 30 minutes in order to prevent, or in order to avoid overwhelming students. Also, you can see the links of the related videos attached. In the next slide, we're going to see how did we cope with the situation to maintain the assessment process. So as you can see, we were able to maintain the normal assessment method, where 35% were accounted to represent assignments, 55% on online-based exams, and 10% on participation. Next slide, please. In next slide, we're going to discuss how the material, or how the report assignment was posted on Google Classroom. As you can see, you also can see the due date stated in this slide. What about the communication tools in the next slide? So finally, in order to allow for an effective communication, students and instructors had a vast choice of communication tools in order to communicate with each other. Where Google Classroom was used, I usually used the Google Stream to post notifications, Google Meet, WhatsApp groups, and even email. And finally, actually, it's difficult to see a potential silver lining from the devastating novel coronavirus pandemic. And however, if we look ahead, we can find a potential good to come out from this devastating COVID, or devastating pandemic. In fact, coronavirus, or the pandemic, has opened wide doors for different opportunities, including blended learning approaches were tried, tested, and increasingly used. Instructors and universities should receive more support for their role during COVID-19, and this crisis will help educators across boundaries to come together, share, and exchange experience. And finally, as Albert Einstein once said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Zana, for this nice discussion and for the interesting talk. I'm going to move now to Dr. Malaika Turner, who is our next panelist. Dr. Turner is an assistant professor and clinical skills coordinator at Howard University. She received her PharmD from Northeastern University and her Master's of Public Health from the Johns Hopkins Blumberg School of Public Health. She participates in various initiatives for academic diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she has currently research involving cultural competency. In fact, apart from the previous talks about pharmaceutics, sterile and non-sterile compounding, Dr. Turner is going to shed a light on patient care in an hands-off environment, mainly with a focus on the use of devices. Malaika, the floor is yours.
Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. Like I said, I'll be very brief. I know we are nearly out of time. I just wanted to briefly talk about how we're performing hands-on learning for patient care in a very hands-off environment. So moving on. So just some various hands-on trainings that we do. Just some examples include different device trainings, whether those are inhalers, blood pressure monitors, glucometers. We also practice injection techniques for our students. So when our university shut down, we had approximately like 4 or 5 weeks left in the semester. So thankfully, we didn't have very many trainings remaining, but one specific one we had left were inhalers. So that's what I'm going to highlight today. So we had to adjust our assessments, of course. So for the inhalers, what we had our students do, well, one note that I want to make is that generally inhalers are an area that we wanted to make sure our students had a little bit more focus on, because this is something that feedback that we have gotten from various reviews once they have gone on to their clinical rotations. So what we had started with, we had our students review videos and tutorials prior to attending lab. So they attended their lecture segment, then they had to review these videos and tutorials. And then we had faculty demonstration. So we had some, so basically I had devices at home on hand, demo devices. So I was able to demonstrate to them in person where they're able to ask questions and actually see the motions and the movements that I'm doing. And then we had them perform mock patient counseling, which we have them perform for all device training. And they performed the patient counseling with a mock patient, which were various faculty members. Moving on. A sample of the questions for the assessments are as follows. We had basically, they were marked as either complete, partially complete, or incomplete. So we had them go through as they would identify themselves, each of the different steps they would use for each of the devices, and then finally some potential side effects and other things, and monitoring parameters. Moving on. So we had some devices on hand and others we did not. We recognized that with the tools actually on hand, students performed slightly higher, about 4% higher than the colleagues that didn't have devices on hand. So it did show that students were a bit more comfortable, and they actually performed their counseling more timely. So there was a slightly smoother in their delivery. And they also displayed more confidence in their verbal explanations. However, with other things such as potential side effects, things that were not based on their actual, actually having the device on hand, they performed about average, as you can see, about a quarter of the students actually completed it. The majority only partially completed, and others did not complete at all. So it did show that the actual device performance had improved with an actual device on hand. However, the other side effects didn't really change in the delivery. I believe that is all the brief explanation that I have. If you all would like to type any additional questions, I can answer, but we would like to move on to our next presenter.
Thank you, Malaika. So actually, pharmacy labs are not just about compounding or creating pharmaceuticals for our students. It is also the hands-on experience which you have done with devices and the good feedback you have seen with your students, which really needs to be shared. Thanks, Malaika. And Malaika, of course, will be happy to answer the questions of our attendees through the Q&A box. Last but not least, we will move to our student representative. I will be glad now to have Ms. Rana Mhaidli, who is a third-year pharmacy student at our school, Lebanese International University School of Pharmacy, and she is a member of the Lebanese Pharmacy Students Association. She's a quite proud member, and she would like to share in very, very few minutes, because we're running out of time. Rana would like to share the student perspective. Welcome, Rana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Dalal. So, first of all, I would like to talk about bias. Before we started remote learning, a lot of people were not open to it, and that negatively affected their entire experience. That is why, before I talk about the feedback and opinion, we must keep in mind that bias is there and that it could affect what we say. Now, in my next slide, I talk about how my colleagues viewed online learning in general. I personally asked my colleagues about their opinions, and there was huge variation. Some people loved it, others hated it. Those who loved it say that it gave them a safe space to study. It gave them the ability to study at their own pace, and it also helped them connect with their fellow students and with the instructors as well. Those who dislike this experience blame it on the instability of electricity and internet connection in Lebanon. Some of them believe that the assessment methods were unfair and that they were done bad by some instructors. And others think that it caused this divide between them and the instructors. Before we move on, I will mention that the School of Pharmacy and LIU in general played a very important part in this transition, and they were always open for feedback, and they had this open door policy, and that truly helped us move forward. Now, in my next slide, I will talk about the quantitative analysis course in specific. This is our matter at hand, the laboratory course. As Dr. Susanna previously mentioned, there were many explanation methods associated with this course, and my colleagues and I absolutely loved them. We loved the voice over PowerPoint format, and the Q&A session truly helped seal the information in our heads. The YouTube videos could be improved by changing them up to videos filmed on campus by our own instructors. The assessment methods were very fair, and the timing of quizzes and exams was so perfect, and it helped avoid misconduct, which is something very important. What are the negatives? Well, the only negative we had was that we felt like we missed out on the bench experience part of this course. We would love to apply our theoretical knowledge in the real world, and that unfortunately could not take place this semester. Now, what does our future look like? First of all, for this course, the quantitative analysis course, it would be very convenient to change the dry lab session into an online session. This would help us avoid the hassle of commute in the morning to the university, and it would also prevent the very stuffy room that we used to sit in. We were 60 students in a small room. Other than that, it's a general suggestion. I believe that during the month of Ramadan, it would be very convenient if we switched up the traditional setting into the online setting, and it would save a lot of my colleagues and I and the instructors fatigue and tiredness throughout this month of fasting. Thank you very much, and I'd love to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Rana, for this explanation. And I think so online learning or remote learning at the end does have really some advantages. Thank you for sharing the student feedback. Last, I will be going over the last couple of slides about assessment used in laboratory courses. So this we will finish up with this. And actually, I will be very brief. I will highlight the experience of our school about remote laboratory courses, where we delivered a survey to assess the feedback and the perception of students about remote laboratory courses. So here in the next slide, I'm showing a list of the courses which we have assessed. Why did we choose this pack of courses? Because these are the courses which do involve laboratory experience. So quantitative analysis, pharmaceutical analysis, and biotechnology compounding, and other parenteral dosage forms in which we teach students also to use parenteral devices and sterile sets. So these are the package of courses which we decided to analyze in order to get student feedback. And the survey instrument consisted of seven points in which we assessed demographics, experience of students, perception towards simulation. By simulation, we mean what Susanna said regarding videos and so on. The development of skills, we mean by this soft skills, practical skills, the learning outcomes of the courses, the assessment, and finally the satisfaction from the students. So actually, we have shared this survey at the end of spring semester 2020 in order to see what was the feedback of our students. We got 329 responses. These are our preliminary results. Most of our students were females, and they were distributed in 8 campuses. Most of our students liked the remote learning tools, and the survey results showed that most of them liked the videotape experiments, the live conferencing, the voice over PowerPoint, in addition to the traditional tools we use, such as handouts and manuals. When it comes to simulation videos, we have used simulation videos from YouTube. So our students found our simulation videos easy to access, reasonable length, with good clarity and with good voicing from the narrator. So the videos were good for the students. However, they were not able to transmit the real experience, just as the panelists have previously said. Next, regarding the skills development, actually we noticed that the most important problem was during the remote delivery is the lack of the development of motor skills and practical skills. And unfortunately, this is something we could not have control on because we were delivering the lab remotely and we did not have like real or real experience. Besides the synchronous and asynchronous teaching, there were no real experience. So the practical skills and the fine motor skills were lacking according to our student perceptions. Regarding the learning outcomes, most of our students, that is about 50%, found that they met the goals of the experiments, which we delivered remotely. 47% were able to analyze and interpret the results, and over 50% were able to write well-organized reports. And actually, this is one of our objectives from laboratory courses. Regarding assessment, which was done online using quizzes, open book exams, videotaped exams on experiments, and in addition to reports and assignments, actually our students believed that the assessment, that they would get the same grade in an online laboratory course as they would get in a regular course. They prefer to have at least one live exam, and this is hopefully what we will try to do if things get better. They believe that they did get effective and timely feedback from their instructors, and they believe that the assessment tools that we have used and explained were efficient and clear. Regarding the student satisfaction, actually students were alert about our deadlines, and the deadlines and setting them was really clear. 52% of our students believe that the online delivery of laboratory courses required motivation, or required the student to have like a sense of self-directed learning. They found also that the courses were enjoyable and that the courses were flexible. So this reflects on what Rana have said, that the students do not have to run to their classes in the early morning to save the time for commute. They do not have to be present all the time because there is synchronous and asynchronous teaching. So actually this fits a flexible schedule, and this was really good for our students. Are we ready for fall 2020, and what are our plans? Extrapolated from the results we got from our students, we are currently preparing an archive of recorded experiments. Our laboratory faculty will record experiments in analysis, in pharmaceutical technology, spectrophotometry, enzymology, and other experiments in order to deliver this archive of recorded experiments. So it's like an experiment really done in the lab and then sent to the students as video. We are inquiring the possibility of using some virtual tools such as Labster, in which we can convert laboratory experiments into real experiments. Labster is developed for certain basic sciences courses, and we will try to look into the possibility of having some pharmacy experiments within Labster. We are looking also into the possibility of blended learning, as the colleagues mentioned. So maybe you would have like limited number of students in the lab and another number of students working from home and so on. So the students will have both online experience as well as real delivery of the laboratory courses. So we are looking into all these possibilities to make ourselves ready for fall 2021 semester. So actually to recap, to finish this on a good note and to recap what all the colleagues have said, we have all to look into the possible scenarios of the new academic year. We have to look into the challenges and try to find some opportunities within them. We have to keep up the motivation of ourselves as faculty and the motivation of our students as well for remote instruction. We have to learn new pedagogies and new approaches. The online delivery or the blended delivery might become our new norm, so we have to adapt and to develop this new norm. We have to identify unique virtual opportunities, and we have seen today the virtual experience with Purdue University as well as with Dr. Pather when he explained virtual reality. So the virtual opportunities do exist. We need to look into them more and to investigate which ones are best for our schools. We also have to value interaction. As the colleagues have said also, we have to communicate with our students and we have to adapt our modes of education in order to meet their needs of remote education or elsewhere. Also, we have always to reflect on student feedback, so to obtain this feedback and try to develop our tools of teaching and learning so that they fit our students. So actually we have to look into this new mode of remote learning as a mode which is different from the traditional teaching. So it's actually not better, it's actually not worse, but it's actually something different. So from what we have seen today, the experience of various faculty across various schools in different regions of the world, we will have to use technology. However, we will have to adapt technology. It will not replace us as faculty, but we will have to adapt it because eventually we will need technology in each and every classroom. So by this, I have recapped what our colleagues have said, and I have shown very briefly our experience in assessment. I'd like to thank you all very much for participating, and I hope that we have answered many of your questions through the Q&A portal. And I would like you please to provide your feedback through the 4-question survey that will appear at the end of the webinar. Thank you.